The anti-slabbers are absolutely going to hate this video. This video is sponsored by Shortboxed, the easiest and safest way to buy and sell graded comic books. Download the app today using the link in the description. The anti-slabbers are absolutely going to hate this video. They are going to lose their minds because in this video, I'm going to spend some time talking about why I like graded comics and why I like to send comics in to be graded. One of the important things to remember is that whether you like raw or graded comics, it really is a personal decision. And so my hope is that by sharing with you some of my rationale for why I choose to get graded comics, it may help you to figure out where you want to draw the line for your collection. And potentially you're like me in that the vast majority of your collection is raw, but you still opt to get some books graded for whatever reason. With that said, I want to give you 5 reasons why I like graded comics. The very first reason that I want to highlight for you comes down to the 2 P's, protection and preservation. As a younger comic book collector, I lived in fear of damaging my comics. And of course, I would bag and board them in poly bags and Mylar if I could ever afford it. But I still lived with this fear in my mind that I was going to drop my comic and damage it and lose my $20 because that was the most expensive comic I had as a young comic book collector. But if you've ever dropped a comic, you know the pain of what I am talking about. One of the great things, again, about getting graded comics is that you have an added layer of protection that goes beyond the poly bag or the Mylar or sticking multiple backing boards into a comic to give it that rigidity that you need in order to, account for a drop that might occur. And so that is part of the reason why I actually love graded comics. They are not 100% protective, but they do give you some added protection. And the cocoon, if you will, the case that comics are encapsulated in creates a little bit of an environment that is conducive to the preservation of that book. So the 2 P's, protection and preservation, are 2 of the main reasons why I choose to grade comics and also to buy graded comic books. The second reason that I want to talk about is security. One of the great things about getting a graded comic to some degree or another is that it de-risks your purchase. And what I mean by that is that the third-party grading company essentially certifies that the comic that is in that case is an authentic comic. Because through the grading process, they actually bring to the surface any known defects, whether it be trimming, pieces missing, color touch, glue, whatever it happens to be. If it's a reputable third-party grader, they will identify those defects and they will bring them to the surface and highlight them on the label. That gives you a little bit of security that if you're buying a comic, if you're spending big money, you are getting something that is legit. If you've ever bought a raw comic and later found out that that comic had some color touch or some replaced staples or something clipped out of it or it was, heaven forbid, trimmed, you know the pain of what I am talking about. Buying graded comics gives you a little bit of some assurance there. Let's say you're of the opinion that you're going to buy all your comics face to face. That is legit. That is a wonderful option, but not everyone has that ability to buy all of their comics face to face, nor do they have the expertise to identify if pieces have been added or if there's professional color touch or restoration. And so again, by buying graded comics, you have a little bit of that assurance because the third-party grading company has the expertise to detect those things. Be certain to leave a substantive comment behind on this video for a chance to win a $100 credit from our friends over at Shortboxed. The third thing that I want to highlight is value. As I mentioned in the previous tip, during the grading process, a third-party grading company essentially evaluates a comic, brings to the surface any defects, and puts those defects onto that comic's label. Once that label is affixed, You have the ability to look that comic up in any number of pricing guides to determine the fair market value. That way you know exactly how much you should pay for that comic. As a result of this process of third-party grading, what you will find is that graded comics will have a value that is higher than a corresponding raw book. The reason being, the raw book has not been de-risked. It has not been evaluated by a professional. Those defects have not been brought to the surface. And so that is why oftentimes a raw book will be worth less than a graded book simply because it has not gone through the process. I should add that I am not saying that raw comics are not valuable. I'm simply saying that by going through the grading process, there is some assurance, there is a guarantee that actually comes with a graded comic that you do not get with a raw comic book. The fourth reason is a little morbid, but it is an important one. At some point, I am going to leave this earth, and I have promised my wife that before I go, I will divest myself of a lot of my comic collection. But what I have told her repeatedly is that if I do not get to execute my plan, that she should focus her attention on selling off for as much money as possible the graded comics that are in my collection. And I'm pointing off to the side because that's where my graded comics are. I tell her not to worry about the raw books so much versus the graded books, which can be referenced in a pricing guide. So my point here is that by getting graded comics, it allows me to distinguish for my family where the value actually is in my collection. The fifth and final thing that I'll say about graded comics is that it comes down to peace of mind. If you're talking about protection and preservation, if you're talking about leaving something behind for my family that makes it easy on them, if you're talking about value, so much of it is about assurance that things are going to be okay. And a lot of it is really personal preference. There is no right way, there is no wrong way. It comes down to what makes the most sense for you. And as I mentioned before, my collection is probably 90% raw and a much smaller percent of graded books. But there's a reason why I have graded books in my collection. There's a reason why the vast majority of the collection is actually raw. If you are watching this and you haven't quite made up your mind where you want to live, the reality is that you don't actually have to pick a side. You can live somewhere in the middle. You can punt and make your decision a little bit later. It really comes down to what you want to do. As always, I want to thank you guys for taking the time to watch this video. If you need to reach out to me, feel free to do so on Instagram at Regie Collects. Take care.